to Way Back When with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy.
Glynn Burrows, owner of Norfolk Tours in England, is back on Big Blend Radio's Way Back When history show today to tell us about the historic ruins you can explore in England. His article on the subject is featured in the summer issue of Big Blend Radio and TV magazine. It's also on blendradioandtv.com. Just type in Glynn's name or see him in our expert department and you'll find all his articles, including that one there. He is one of our regular contributors, has been for many, many years. And the thing is, the best thing to do is really go to his website, go to norfolk-tours-uk. And if you go to England, Scotland, or Wales, call Glynn. He will help you with your family history, and he will put together a great tour of all the places you want to go to, not some tour company that says, I'm taking you on this and that's that. So, Glynn,
Nice.
Glynn, welcome back. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Rather warm today, but doing good, thanks.
It's good to have you back. And talking about ruins, it's quite interesting. You know, we've talked about ruins a little bit over the years when we talk about, you know, the historic churches and family history. But I didn't expect this getting so in depth of how these ruins even came to be. I just thought, oh, you know, they're old and people moved on to different pieces of land. But this is pretty interesting. But before we talk about all the ruins, because it sounds like there's a lot of them, do you go out there and do you play detectorist out at the ruins? We have to ask
You're not allowed to.
See, I knew it. I won that bet. Nancy. I told you.
No, you're not allowed to use a metal detector on any historical site that's registered.
Okay.
Well, it makes
But
sense.
I'll tell you what I do, and that's what most historians and most archaeologists do, is when I'm walking around, if there's a molehill, I will kick it to see if there's anything dug up by the mole.
So you're a mole hunter. I'm a
molehill kicker.
Oh, there's a kicker. That's a new thing.
You're a kickerist.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're a kickerist. That's so that way, yeah, because you can get away with that. So is because there's that TV show Detectorist, and it's interesting. And I keep going, are they near Glynn? Because I see, you know, all this beautiful greenery, and it just looks so beautiful. Is that a big thing in England? People going out with their metal detectors?
Yeah, it is in lots of places. I mean, I've got a metal detector and I do use it, or I did use it years ago when I had time. But I use it for historical purposes. So, you know, I report everything to the archaeological unit because it's really important that if anyone finds anything, that they report it so it gets plotted on a map, because then they can see the distribution of anything that's been discovered. The problem is when people go out and they call it treasure hunting because it's all about money. They go out with a metal detector and just find a load of Roman coins or whatever and sell them on eBay or any other website that might sell stuff. And then they're completely lost to history. So the find spots are not recorded and the items are just put in somebody's collection. So they're not actually teaching us anything about history, and that is the most important thing. If I find a Roman coin in my back garden, it means that a Roman person or a Roman British person or somebody dropped it 1900 years ago or 1800 years ago. So it actually means that there was somebody on this site. Whereas if no one tells anybody anything about where things are found, then we're not going to learn, are we? So the most important thing is that if anybody finds anything like that, they need to report it to the archaeologist units, which are in every county. You know, so everything gets plotted.
This is why we have cameras. Take a photo of it. You know, I mean, then you have it in your history files. You know, for your personal, like, oh, I saw this here. You know, but if you did see a Roman coin in your backyard, Glynn, you would flip out, wouldn't you? You'd be like all jumping around excited.
Well, I would, because there aren't that many Roman sites within this small area where I live. Where my parents live, mind you, I can go 200 yards down the road and I can pick up a carrier bag full of Roman pottery. because there were Romans in that area a lot. So, you know, and I have found Roman coins. I found a little tiny Roman bracelet. You know, I found lots of little things like that in where my parents live. But where I live, there isn't that much Roman activity. Not in my backyard, so to speak.
Interesting. And now the ruins, going to the ruins, because it's all connected in a way here. You know, the ruins, to me, it's really fascinating. Out here, our ruins can, you know, we have forts made out of adobe out here in the Southwest. But the ruins can also be Native American ruins. It could be cliff dwellings where they made houses up in the mountains. So it's really different. And of course, there's churches as well. And then places do just get abandoned. I mean, you could take a drive across. I mean, we saw it even in Florida, Nancy and I, where people abandoned places because of hurricanes, and eventually even barns become ruins. So we have modern day ruins, and then we have ancient ruins. But yours, you start going back. It really. You said a lot of the ruins are because of King Henry VIII. I'm Henry VIII, I am, and I took your buildings.
Yes. Well, the main thing about Henry VIII was the fact that he wanted to get rid of his first wife because she weren't giving him an heir, and he wanted to marry someone younger and prettier, and the Pope wouldn't allow him to get a divorce. So he decided that he would get rid of the Pope, well, not actually get rid of the Pope, but stop England being a Catholic country. And if he was the head of the church, then he could allow himself to get a divorce. So that's what he did. He invented the Church of England, and he became the head of the church. And that then allowed him to allow himself to get a divorce, which is what he did.
Wow.
And when he got a divorce, you see, he then obviously then was allowed to marry, but the knock-on effect of that was that all of the Catholic churches in England then became Church of England churches. All the monasteries, priories, abbeys, hospitals, because hospitals used to be run by the church, but all of these buildings then were used by the Church of England, and of course they didn't actually need them all. So they just kept a few monasteries that were being used as cathedrals and parish churches, and the rest of them they got rid of. So he basically stole all the property, all the land, all the gold and silver, and everything else that belonged to the churches and the monasteries, and sort of took it.
All in the name
you can
of
do
God,
that when
right?
you're the king.
Just writing your own religion up. I mean, I think that's pretty funny,
There's
actually.
a few, we won't get into that.
Yeah.
But I always wondered about the Church of England. I always thought, well, you know, that, I mean, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's like everybody must belong to this church, not your belief system. It sounds like that. You know what I mean? By like,
I mean, years ago it was that you belonged to the Church of England, you know, but then this is when the non-conformists came in. I mean, we're now talking other things other than ruins, but the history of English churches is quite interesting because, you know, non-conformity came in the 18th century and a bit before, but mainly 18th century. So then you got the Methodists and the Wesleyan Methodists and the Congregationalists and all of those sort of people. But the Church of England was always the national church, and the Queen is still the head of the church. The Queen is the head of the Church of England, and that's, in a way, that's where some people thought it was wrong for Prince Charles to get divorced, because when and if he becomes king, he's going to be the head of the Church of England. So there was quite a big debate going on about that at the time. Because the head of the Church of England being a divorcee isn't necessarily what a lot of the people in the church wanted. But, you know,
yeah, but isn't that how it started? The king wanted to divorce, so he made up his. So it sounds like the right religion.
But that back then it was annulled, right? It was annulled, not divorce, because I don't think they didn't have divorce way back then. It was like.
Well, no, it's the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, they were allowed to go their separate ways and allowed to remarry if they wanted to. and that's all Henry VIII wanted to do. But the Pope wouldn't allow that, so he was kicked to the touch, or whatever they call it, kicked to the sidelines.
Yeah, kick to the curb. That's what we say here. Kick to the curb.
Yeah.
But you didn't have curbs back then. You're a kick to the moat. I don't know. Kick to the molehill. the kick to the molehill. We're back to kicking. It's all about kicking here. Kicking people off their land. Kicking. This is amazing. Though someone just says, "Okay, that's it. I'm taking over the church. I'm changing the religion. That's that." But now this became an actual church, of England. So now, do people? Is the belief system similar to the Catholic? Did he try and keep the same? I mean, or did he rewrite the Bible? What did he do? How did he just say, okay, that's it? I know this is off topic, but it's wild.
Yes, it is. I'm not really an expert on ecclesiastical matters, but basically I think the Catholics more worship the Virgin Mary, and I think the Church of England, although they obviously acknowledge that the Virgin Mary is the mother of Christ, I think they more look at Christ as the sort of church person. I don't really understand all the differences between the different religions, but basically it was started so that Henry VIII could take over everything and be in charge. And he became, not only did he take over the church, but all of their land. Because, I mean, even now, the Church of England is actually one of the biggest landowners in the country, if not the biggest landowner in the country. And that's even now, after all the monasteries and the abbeys and the priories have gone. So the Church of England owned thousands and thousands of acres, and in the thousands and thousands of pounds worth of goods and tithes and services and I mean, in the Middle Ages, the church did everything. When you died, your will was proved by the church. The church administered everything because monks were some of the few people who could read and write. So they did everything. Abbeys, monasteries, they're the places where hospitals were. If you were sick, you went to a monastery or an abbey, and they would look after you. If you wanted accommodation, you would go to a church or an abbey, because they used to, not a hotel as such, but they would give lodgings. So, the church was the center of the universe for 90% of 99% of the population, because you had to use the church for everything. And the only other thing, the only other sort of, not government, but the only other sort of administration system were the manor courts. But they were closely allied with the churches because they were all the same class of people mixing together. So the church were a very, very powerful body of people.
Oh, interesting. This is really interesting how that happened. So now you have all these ruins, and we've got the photos of it, and everyone, like I said, Glynn's article's up on blendradioandtv.com. Just type in ruins, you'll find it. And these are like these big archways, like the entrances, and they're just like standing there, but without the rest of the body of the building,
Yes.
And does anybody preserve these? Are they, like you said, they're registered, so these are landmarks, so they're protected in a way, right?
Yes, all of these sorts of buildings are now under either English heritage or something similar, so they're all on protected sites, so they can't do anything with them apart from preserve them. But before English heritage and these preservation bodies were formed, they were just used as whatever you wanted to use them for. Many of them were used as farm buildings. The reason that most of them are in ruins now is because people stole the stonework to build houses and buildings. Because if you've got an absolutely massive building on your doorstep and you want to build a wall, you take your wheelbarrow or you take your horse and cart and you fill it up with stones from this old building that's standing there falling down. You don't go looking around the fields for stones if they're standing just up the road. So lots of them were plundered. Again, lots of them had been sold. So, for instance, when Henry VIII decided to dissolve the monasteries, as it was called, if any of the big landowners nearby wanted hardcore or wanted building materials, then he would sell the rubble. And people used to use the rubble of these buildings as building material, obviously, because it was all just standing there doing nothing. So, I mean, but yeah. this does go to prove how one little tiny subject, you think, all right, let's talk about ruins. But when you start to actually look into it, you then learn so much more about the history of England. You're not just learning about a ruin, you're learning about the monarchy, you're learning about the church, you're learning about historical governance, how the country was run, how normal people built their houses. You learn so much.
It seems like there was, for the people, the regular people, through all these changes and through these, the different centuries too, that it's like confusion. Like, what do you believe in? Who do you believe in? You know what I mean? How do you continue your life? You look at what's going on in the government, the monarchy, like you're saying, and how do you, you've got to make your best life no matter what's going on. I mean, if we look around the world now, I don't think many places are clear and free on how they're being run. Let's just put it that way.
No.
Everybody could use a little bit of improvement, including our country here. Just in, and I'm not picking sides. I'm just saying in general, there's unrest. And when there's unrest and change and someone's taking over the land and the buildings, that's a very scary thing for people to go through, yet they continue forward as best they can in life. And I think that's always such a interesting story. And when you go back in history and you go to these places and you start to connect them to actual people and how they survived, I think that's where it's so important to go to these places so that we realize, let's not do that again, or don't allow someone to do that again,
But the trouble is, if someone comes along who's in charge and they tell you as a little peasant, or even me today, right, if someone comes along and says to me today, right, if you go to the church, we are now going to have to say bibbledy-bobbledy when we walk in the door, right? Stupid thing like that. I'm going to then, unless I want to cause a scene, I'm going to go in the church door and I'm going to say bibbledy-bobbledy because that's what I've been told I've got to say. So in 10 years' time, everyone will think that I actually agreed to saying bibbledy-bobbledy when I walk into the church. Well, I didn't. I just done as I was told. But years ago, people were told to do different things, or people were told to what to accept. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't do it, number one, they didn't have a house. Number two, they didn't have a job. Number three, they didn't have any money, so they ended up on the streets. So they had to do what they were told because the person who was in charge had them completely. They were more or less owned by the landowners.
Wow.
And the landowners were often owned by the bigger landowners or the church or the king. So therefore, if the king then took over the church and he said, this is how high you have to jump, that's how high you jump.
Wow.
So that, nothing changes. Nothing changes today.
Nothing has changed.
Today the same.
Sorry, I can't stand it. I'm just like, history repeats itself. And,
it does.
And I wonder how much, things become, okay, so you say bibbly-bobbledy or bobbledy-bibbledy. I like saying that. That's fun. If that became a thing, then later this becomes part of the culture. And people will just be doing it without realizing where bibbledy-bobbledy even came from. They'll just do it as this is what we say here, and then a visitor comes in, they're like, no, we say bibbly-bobbly. And they'll go, why? Well, we've always done that. It's always been done this way. You know how you always hear that in business and, corporations, and things you always hear, this is how it's done and it doesn't want to change. And then you go, excuse me, do you know where that comes from? And then people look, well, and that's the thing to the importance, again, of digging into history, because then you start to find out And then you can look at what's going on now and go, are we in the same predicament?
Exactly. And funnily enough, I've probably told you before, I used to be chair of governors at a primary school. And one of my favourite notes on the staff notice board that the headmaster used to have on the staff notice board was a simple phrase. And the phrase said, children should be questioning answers as well as answering questions. And I thought that was absolutely profound, because we should question the answers as well as answer the questions, because actually the answers are not always correct. So we need to question everything, because if we don't, we're just going to be sheep and we're just going to carry on making mistakes. But, you know, I can't change the world. I can just make my little bit different.
You know, I think it's important worldwide that people really start to understand who's in power and how they got there and what the powers are. I know in our country we tried to put what they call checks and balances in so somebody couldn't take complete control. Apparently we need to relook at that. And it's kind of a warning to other countries too. Before you just go elect somebody, you maybe want to check your checks and balances and see, because there's mass confusion here as to can he or can he not do this, you know, and we should already know that. Mm-hmm. And now
exactly. Like, well, I mean, in them days, like I said, you know, when Henry VIII said something, everybody just agreed with him, because if they didn't, they lost their heads. You know, it's not quite the same today, but people still just follow the status quo because they like a comfortable life. Well, actually, sometimes, you know, somebody's got to stand up and say something, because if they don't, we're going to go down the pan. And, you know, it's happened millions of times since, and it's going to keep happening because no one says anything.
That's right.
What was it? The quote, I think it is something like, all it takes for evil to succeed is a good men to say nothing. I think there's something like that.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I think, you know, that's what, you know, when we look at things like the free speech movement, being allowed to have that is for journalists, for people to say things, to be, you know, and that has been tried for the last 20 years here. Have been rough on that. And I mean, through all the different, you know, leaders that we've had in this country, we've had battles with this. And it's a scary battle, because I just interviewed a retired judge on this, who wrote, you know, she's incredible. And I started talking about, well, where are we on free speech? According to a book about Faye Stender, it's a movement lawyer here who's since passed, but she did incredible things. And so she says, well, you know, you got to be clearer than just say free speech, because it's so, every little step, when we were talking about this in history, you take one step, you're going to take two steps backwards, but if you didn't take that first step, you'll never get to the next step. And that's how it is. And so every little success that we have, understand it will go away in a flash, but you've got to respect all those steps in the back, because at least now it's created a dialogue. Conversation is so important to keep people moving forward in the direction they want, or their vision, their communities, their country, you know. But she was talking about all these different laws, whether it was women's rights, prison reform, free speech, civil rights. She was talking about every single one gets in, you know, finally, even if you lose, the battle has begun. Somebody stood up somewhere, and as soon as someone stands up, you start to have a little bit of energy and traction moving in that direction. And that goes whether it's the good or the bad. You know, and the bad will take it.
By somebody standing up, there are probably another 50 million people in the world who are thinking, oh, thank God someone has stood up, because I agree with him. You know, that is the thing. Unless somebody stands up, everybody is sitting there thinking they're the only person who thinks that way. Well, actually, they're not. There's a lot of people. And, you know, for instance, in 1381, I think it was, there was the Peasants' Revolt, because the peasants were revolting about taxes and things like that. But, you know, they didn't actually get very far, but at least they revolted and they did something, because they were fighting against the landowners who were just steamrolling over them. And, you know, the poor people tried to do something about it. So they tried.
Well, it's like here in our country, was it last year, the Dakota Access Pipeline? And,
yes.
you know, here comes, you know, let's put oil and, we're going to go through the, you know, the water's not a big deal. That's not land. And it's Native American country. It's ranchers country. And it was amazing. You know, even if they didn't win that one battle, what was amazing and incredible was the number of indigenous people from around the world that came
yes.
and stood, you know,
yes.
with water is life. And to this day, people are walking around remembering this, water is life, as we're right now facing all those bills being tossed out to protect clean water. But that if even if that's what I was saying, even if we didn't win right there and then, we won in so many different ways that people remember that you can unite all colors,
yes.
all people
yes.
from all around the world can unite on one thing that's right. You know?
Just needs people to get off the backside and do something.
That's right. It's another swift kick, Glynn. Get off the molehill. Get off the molehill. One thing, I want to go back to the ruins too, because we always do solve the world problems, right, Glynn? That's the thing.
Yeah, we do always.
Our segment. We should just form our own government, Glynn. We'll be good between
we
us.
Would.
You know? We would be good. Now, the other part that I thought was so funny, not funny, interesting is, so you've got castles, you've got the churches, you've got the cathedrals, you've got all of these pieces of property. And then also, I want to get into the World War I history too, because you had a photo of these rusted bicycles, and it's just, so you take ruins into all these different kinds of things that you'll see. But one thing you talked about was, because he took all the you know, the buildings, the land, and made it the Church of England, then the pilgrimages stopped. But you said now
yes.
the pilgrimages are coming back, and if these are part of the old ancient pilgrim routes, right?
Yes, I mean, obviously we've all heard of the Canterbury Tales. I think even probably in America you would have heard of Chaucer. I hope you have.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good. But you know, people used to do pilgrimages to Canterbury, and most of the abbeys, monasteries, cathedrals had something of a saint. So most of them would have either a finger bone or a toe bone or something, or there'd be a piece of the cross. You know, I've heard it said that if every piece of the cross was actually a piece of the cross, it would have been about 18,000 feet tall or something, but you know, something silly. But they all had something to encourage pilgrims to go and visit these different places. Well, Walsingham in Norfolk had a replica of the house in Nazareth where Christ was born, because in 1061 the Virgin appeared to a lady called Richenda, who was living in Walsingham at the time, and the Virgin told her to build a replica of the house in Nazareth on her piece of land. So she built this replica, and it became a pilgrimage site. Well, it was a pilgrimage site right the way up until Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, because there was an abbey in the village, there was a friary in the village, and there was also a slipper chapel. And the slipper chapel was specifically there for people to remove their shoes, so they walked the final mile barefoot as a penance. So there was a chapel where they used to remove their shoes. Anyway, and funnily enough, Henry VIII actually came and did a pilgrimage there, and so did most kings and queens before he dissolved the monasteries. But after that, then they just became houses. The slipper chapel just became a cattle shed, actually. But then in the end of the 19th century, a lady gave the barn, which it had become, back to the Catholic Church, and they then turned it into the Shrine of Her Lady. And this then became, again, a massive pilgrimage site. And it is now, it is probably one of the biggest Catholic shrines in the country. And if you go there at Easter, there are thousands upon thousands of people who always come there. Nearly all of the universities in the country send a delegation of students who walk with a cross from their university to Walsingham. So they walk from wherever they are, bearing a cross to Walsingham, because that's a big pilgrimage site. But what I sort of had to try and get over to people in my article was the fact that not only did he dissolve the monasteries, but there was such a massive knock-on effect to anywhere where there was a monastery, because they then suddenly lost all these visitors. And we know, as anybody does, that the tourism pound is worth a lot to local business. And if you suddenly cut off the reason for people to visit, you've suddenly lost a massive stream of income. So it must have made an absolutely horrendous knock-on effect to all the villages and towns where there were these big pilgrimage places.
Wow. See, and that's something that hasn't changed today, because governments make decisions, and they make it usually looking at resources like oil and gas. They don't ever look at tourism. They just do things. Yeah, well, this will create jobs over here. Well, then a whole bunch of people on this side lost jobs because you did that over there, because you just ruined a tourism destination.
Yeah.
They don't ever look at the entirety or the whole thing. They look at one specific industry that they probably have stocks in or something.
Yeah, well, and the only thing that threatens tourism, it's like the only thing that threatens animals is humans. The only thing that threatens tourism is bad leadership. And that's it. Well, that's the only thing, really.
Exactly. I mean,
or the climate, the weather. But if we're not behaving ourselves and the weather goes wonky because we're not being clean in how we do our things, we play a hand in that. But that's the thing. Bad leadership means that's what can destroy it. All the other things can run out, or change to a point like a robot's doing it. But tourism is human interaction.
Yes. And the thing that sort of brings it home to, like, for buy local Norfolk, bring it back to that, and supporting the local economy, the government or the local government will give permission to a big supermarket because they're going to give 500 jobs. Little do they realise that those 500 jobs are probably only 10-hour contracts, and those 500 jobs are going to be very, very lowly paid, and those 500 jobs are probably going to take away 400 jobs from the different shopkeepers who are now going to be out of business. So, the same thing is happening where they're not looking at the big picture. They're just looking at what they get told, and they're not actually looking at what effect it's going to have all around. So by Henry VIII doing away with the monasteries, it weren't just the fact that he was then able to get married, which was just a stupid little thing. That's the whole reason he did it. But he changed the entire structure of a lot of towns and villages completely by removing one of their big income streams. So that it's just amazing what effect that must have had in the middle of the 16th century.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy, because I mean, we're still doing these kinds of things today.
Yeah. So that's what I think is so. We talk about this a lot about how history repeats, but that's why, again, go back and get into the ruins. Go look at what happened in those times. What are we doing today? Compare. The one thing that stays the same seems to be how we handle things as human beings. How we treat each other.
The other thing, when you look at leadership and are they looking in the future, the jobs that are always created are always the first jobs to go. They're always the ones that are being the easiest ones to be taken over by the artificial intelligence robots, which are our next big drama on the way. Really, I don't know about your markets, but our supermarkets are like, check yourself out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never do.
Like, huh?
I never will use a self-service checkout. Never.
No, I don't know how to do it.
I know. We don't use them either because we know that means somebody's not going to have a job. However, they're going to go to, that is how if you want to go to the market, that's what you're going to do. Because they're not going to have cashiers anymore. So these big jobs that are made by these big companies that come on, those people, the first people on the chopping block are exactly those jobs. If you look at mining and gas exploration, those are dangerous and not very clean jobs. those are the easiest things to be replaced by a robot.
Yeah.
So I mean, to mess around with tourism and other industries that are sustainable for the sake of creating a few jobs over here that are down the road not going to be there anyway makes no sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's interesting. I want to go to World War I and World War II because that left some ruins as well.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and there are less ruins for World War One because most of the World War One sites were like grass runways and sort of wooden huts, and most of the actual sites, what they used were in France and Belgium. But the thing that happened in England very often was at the same time as the war came along, although they were sort of joined together in a way, were the doing away of the big houses. They were slowly going out of fashion before the war, but during the war they sort of did go more so, and after the war even more so. So a lot of the big houses found other uses. Now, I don't know if you watched Downton Abbey, but the interesting thing there was they did actually cover the fact that the big stately houses were used as World War I hospitals, because especially with the young women who were left at home, they didn't have anything necessarily that they could do. So it was very good for them to turn to being nurses. And especially the landed gentry obviously didn't want their daughters to go to the front. So they allowed their daughters to be nurses at home, and they used their houses as recuperation hospitals. So a lot of the big houses were used as World War I hospitals, and obviously as well for World War I billets for soldiers if they needed to be in a specific area. But this thing really took off in the Second World War because a lot of these big houses had by then gone out of use almost completely. So they were commissioned by the government to be used as army hospitals again, or army billets. And a lot of them were used, especially in East Anglia, a lot of them were used by the Americans because they came over and needed a headquarters. And these big houses stood there doing nothing. So very often you'll find that during the war, the big houses were being used by the services, and then afterwards, a lot of them were either left to fall down or were demolished. And after the Second World War, a lot of these big houses were just left to fall down. And some ruins are these big stately houses, like Downton Abbey. You know, there's one about 5-6 miles away from me, and that was built in 1851, and it's now just a ruin. It's just standing there, falling down.
Wow. You know,
unbelievable.
Photographers love ruins. There's
they do.
Yeah, I like to photograph ruins. We have a lot of ruins that come also from the gold rush era, and you go to these ghost towns out in the desert, like Nevada has a bunch, and it's just, you get that. It's just weird. There's an area. Yeah, you can just kind of like you just feel it, and you talk about it in your article where you can just feel what it was like then, and who was there, and you could hear the music if you want, like you can hear the honky tonk and the old saloons and things, you know. Yeah. But where was the bicycles? Those rusted bicycles? Oh yeah.
Again, during the Second World War, we had a lot of American servicemen because East Anglia, especially as I've touched on before, was really handy for Europe because we're just across the North Sea. So there were a lot of air bases. We had a lot of the 8th Air Force were based in this area, and their bases are scattered all over the county in Norfolk and Suffolk and parts of Essex. But the bicycles are actually in an airfield about 6 miles again from me, and some of the old huts are still standing, and they've got the paintings on the wall. You know, the pin-up girls. Some of the paintings are on the wall still, and bicycles are still leaning against the wall in these huts that were used by Second World War airmen. And I actually had the honour of showing one of the men who actually was at that airfield during the Second World War, I was able to take him back to that particular airfield, and he was able to walk amongst the buildings where he was when he was a 19-year-old, and it was amazing, very humbling, I can tell you.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing, you know, when you think of that. So, Glynn, you get in the way back when time machine, and you get to get out at a ruin. And what ruin would it be? Like, what century are we going in, and why do you want to go there?
Wow.
You could go back when it's intact. You could go back to when it was like not a ruin. Or
I would like to go back to Castle Acre, because Castle Acre has not only got a ruined castle, but it's got a ruined priory as well. And I would like to go to Castle Acre in about 1250 AD and see what it was like then. It would be a real honor to go there and to see the village as it was as a medieval village. It'd be really good.
I know medieval.
That's so much fun.
Medieval history is so neat. It is so neat. It's fascinating to me. It really is. Glynn, thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you on the show so we can fix the world. That's always good. Again, everyone, Glynn's articles are up on blendradioandtv.com, also on our other site, nationalparktraveling.com. But again, go to his website, norfolk-tours.uk. And if you're planning a trip to England, definitely get connected with Glynn, especially looking at unearthing your family history, because he's got a metal detector. Yes. That sounded bad. But no, he can really help you with actually searching out your family history if you have ancestry in England. So a really good thing, and take you to historic sites and ruins and places that you want to go without other tour companies dictating what you're going to see and do. So again, norfolk-tours.co.uk. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us. Don't forget, Big Blend Radio airs Monday through Thursdays, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Fridays and Sundays, 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. The schedule is always up at bigblendradio.com. And you can also click through to listen as the shows air live or anytime on demand from the outlet you choose. But we've got a song for you, Glynn.
Good.
This is called Beneath a Solemn Sky. It is from a band based out of Florida. They're called the Gunboat Diplomats. And everyone go to gunboatdiplomats.com. It's off of their upcoming new album called Manifest Destiny. They're into history, Glynn. They're historians over there. And this song will take you back to thinking about what happens after a war and during a war and lost love. And it just kind of puts it in perspective about what happens in history, that solemn feeling, you know? So
I look forward to listening to it.
It's a beautiful song. It's touching. It's touching for sure. Thanks so much, everyone. Here it is, Beneath a Solemn Sky. Thanks so much, Glynn.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
By a brown and withered garden, there's a chapel in the sand, where the wicked and the faithful come to make their final stand. As another bitter season ends, now the hour is at hand, for the seeds of hope have fallen on parched and stony ground. Can you hear the prophets calling as the world keeps spinning round? But it all goes with the territory, and for what it's worth, the meek and brave prepare a grave in the dusty barren earth, while the bones of last week's promises are buried in the square. The saints and doubting Thomases all bow their heads in prayer, but the words will bring no comfort to the foolish or the wise, till the heavens rain on the brittle grain like teardrops from the quiet, solemn skies. Now the thunder clouds are gathering, a shadow on the land. So rejoice, you sons and daughters, but wouldn't it be rich if the holy healing waters soon undermined the bridge, rushing up to breach the levee on that long and fateful day, till the rising flood made it clear as mud, all the sins are washed away, down the ancient winding river to the dark and briny sea. Now these old foundations shiver at the sacred memory of that brief and blessed moment when Providence supplied a sad lament for the penitent who are damn well sanctified. Oh, oh.